Red Bull was gaining up to nearly 2/10 per lap in the final seconds without adding a single unit of power. Completely legal, completely invisible, and completely unstoppable. Until Ferrari saw one thing no one else noticed. Not a boost. Not a new engine mode. Something far more dangerous. The car wasn't slowing down when physics said it had to. And that tiny difference was enough to decide pole positions. Enough to control the grid. Enough to hide what was really happening. But the moment Ferrari asked one question, the FIA stepped in. And the second they started watching, the entire advantage vanished overnight. Which means everything Red Bull achieved so far is about to be tested for real. At first, nobody questioned it. Because Red Bull didn't look suspicious. They looked precise. Controlled. Almost perfect at the exact moment every lap is decided. The final straight. The last seconds before the line. That's where their advantage lived. Not across the entire lap. Not in every corner. Just there. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because when an advantage only appears at the end, most teams don't see it. They focus on sectors. On corner speed. On traction. They chase what looks obvious. While Red Bull was winning where nobody was looking. And the difference was small. Almost invisible. A fraction of a second. But in Formula 1, that's everything. That's pole position. That's track position. That's control of the race before it even begins. So session after session, that hidden game kept working. Quietly. Consistently. Building results. Building confidence. Building a narrative that Red Bull had simply found more performance. But something didn't add up. Because when you compare the data closely, when you isolate the final meters, a pattern appears. Where every other car begins to lose speed, Red Bull doesn't. Where the system should limit performance, their car stays stable. And that's not normal. Because every engineer knows what happens when the battery runs low. The system pulls power back. The car slows down. It's not optional. It's part of the design. It's part of the rules. So when one car behaves differently, there are only two possibilities. Either they found something extraordinary, or they understood something others didn't. And that's the moment where everything begins to change. Because once that question exists, it doesn't go away. It grows. Lap after lap. Data point after data point. Until ignoring it becomes impossible. And that's when Ferrari stopped guessing and started investigating. Because in Formula 1, once something doesn't make sense, it becomes the only thing that matters. So they went deeper. Not into the full lap. Not into the obvious sectors. Into the final meters. The last part of the straight. The exact point where every system should be at its limit. Battery nearly empty. Energy deployment fading. The car naturally losing speed. That's the expected behavior. That's what every simulation predicts. That's what every team sees in their own data. Except Red Bull didn't. Their speed trace told a different story. No gradual drop. No visible limitation. Just stability. Even a slight increase, exactly where that shouldn't be possible. And that's where the situation changes completely. Because now, it's no longer about performance. It's about behavior. A system behaving in a way it was never supposed to. So Ferrari asked the only question that matters in that moment. Not how are they faster, but why are they different? And that question led them somewhere unexpected. Not to aerodynamics. Not to setup. Not even to traditional engine power. It led them to the hybrid system itself. The MGUK. The part of the car responsible for deploying and recovering energy. The part governed by strict rules, designed to control exactly what happens when the battery runs out. And that's where everything clicks. Because there is a rule. A safety rule. When the battery reaches its minimum, the system must reduce power gradually. To avoid sudden deceleration. To protect drivers behind. That's the intention. But next to that rule, there's something else. A penalty. If the system is shut off completely instead of reducing gradually, it gets locked for 60 seconds. No hybrid power. No recovery. A punishment designed to stop teams from doing exactly that. But here's the detail that changes everything. That penalty only matters if it affects the lap. And suddenly, Ferrari realizes something. There is a moment where it doesn't. Right after the finish line. And once you understand that, the entire trick reveals itself. Because once you see that moment, you can't unsee it. Right before the finish line. At the exact point where every car should begin to lose speed. Red Bull does the opposite. They don't follow the gradual reduction. They don't accept the limitation. They shut the system off. Completely. No transition. No resistance. And in that instant, everything changes. Because the moment the MGUK stops working, it also stops recovering energy. It stops dragging the car back. It stops limiting speed. And suddenly, the car is free. The combustion engine keeps pushing. But nothing is holding it down anymore. No forced recovery. No artificial slowdown. Just pure forward motion. And in those final meters, that creates a massive difference. Up to 130 horsepower equivalent, exactly where the lap is decided. The car reaches the line faster. The time is locked. The lap is done. And only then, the penalty activates. 60 seconds without the system. But it doesn't matter. Because the driver is already lifting. Already cooling the tires. Already returning to the pits. That entire penalty happens in a moment where performance is irrelevant. So the cost is zero. But the gain stays. And that's the brilliance of it. A rule designed to stop teams. Turned into an advantage. A safety system. Used as a weapon. And for 3 races, it worked perfectly. Invisible. Undetectable at first glance. But devastating once understood. Because this wasn't just a small gain. It was enough to decide qualifying. Enough to control track position. Enough to shape entire race weekends. Until one thing changed. Ferrari didn't try to copy it. They didn't try to hide it. They exposed it. And the moment that happened, the entire system collapsed. And that's when everything changed. Not on track. Not in the car. Inside the FIA. Because once Ferrari raised the question, the system had to respond. And in Formula One, when the FIA starts looking closely, nothing stays hidden. They didn't look for speed. They looked for intent. They analyzed every shutdown. Every trace in the data. Every moment where the system stopped behaving normally. And suddenly, the pattern was obvious. This wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It was controlled. Deliberate. Triggered at the exact same point, lap after lap. Right before the finish line. And that changes everything. Because now, it's no longer just a clever interpretation of the rules. It becomes something much more serious. A safety system, being used in a way it was never designed for. And that's where the FIA has no choice. Because even if the rule isn't technically broken, the consequence is too big to ignore. Cars reaching the line up to 40 kilometers per hour faster than expected, in a zone where other drivers are calculating distance and timing based on predictable speeds. That's not just performance. That's risk. Real risk. So the FIA doesn't need to rewrite the regulations. They do something far more powerful. They start monitoring everything. Every disconnection. Every anomaly. Every single activation of that system. And from that moment on, the trick is no longer invisible. It's exposed. Not publicly, but technically. And in Formula One, that's enough to kill it. Because once something is being watched, using it becomes a gamble. A gamble with penalties. With deleted lap times. With the entire weekend at risk. And no top team takes that gamble. So just like that, an advantage that was shaping qualifying disappears. Completely. Overnight. But here's the real consequence. Because losing something like that doesn't just make you slower. It reveals something much more important. What your real performance actually is without it. And this is where the illusion finally disappears. Because for 3 races, the grid wasn't completely real. Not fully. Not honestly. There was an extra factor hidden in the final meters of every lap. A gain of up to nearly 2/10, deciding positions before the race even began. Now, that factor is gone. And when you remove something like that, everything changes. Because those final tenths are where Formula One is decided. Pole position. Front row. Clean air. Control of the race. All of it comes from margins that small. So when Red Bull loses that advantage, they don't just lose time. They lose position. Now imagine the driver's perspective. Same car. Same setup. Same approach. But suddenly, the lap ends differently. The car fades at the end of the straight. That final push is no longer there. And you can feel it instantly. You try to compensate. You push harder. Brake later. Attack the entry. But that's where mistakes begin. Because you're chasing something that doesn't exist anymore. Meanwhile, other teams feel something completely different. Nothing changes for them. Their car behaves exactly the same. Predictable. Stable. Consistent. And that consistency becomes confidence. Confidence becomes precision. And precision wins laps. But here's where it goes deeper. Because this doesn't just affect the driver. It affects the entire team. Engineers now have to rethink everything. Energy deployment. Software behavior. End-of-lap strategy. All of it changes overnight. And those changes take time. Time they don't have. Because the next race comes immediately. The pressure builds instantly. And while Red Bull is trying to recover, others are already ready. Already operating in this new reality. And that's the key. Because in Formula One, reaction is always slower than preparation. And the team that was prepared for this moment is the one that gains the most. Which leads to the final truth of this entire story. Because this was never just about a trick. Or a loophole. Or even a decision from the FIA. This was about exposure. The moment where everything hidden becomes visible. The moment where performance is no longer influenced by something no one can see. Just the car. The driver. The truth. And now, for the first time this season, there is nowhere left to hide. No invisible advantage. No hidden gain. Just pure speed. And that leads to the only question that matters. When everything became real again, was Red Bull ever truly ahead, or were they just ahead because of something that no longer exists?